One of the issues that people have been having more lately is tightness in their hips. Tightness can come from sitting for prolonged periods of time. We also tend to carry stress in our hips. So when we're sitting for prolonged periods, the front of our hips are getting short and they're getting stiff. At the same time, the back of our hips are actually getting stretched out long and weak. So we need to work on balancing that. So we got to stretch out the front and strengthen the back. Also, when we sit for a prolonged period of time, we tend to, as we get tired, roll our legs out. Right? So as we roll our legs out, that puts some rotation into my hip sockets, and that creates pressure on the outside of my hips, which can possibly create pain down the outside of my legs. So let's go over a few things that are going to happen with that and how we can change those things. So the first thing we want to work on is reducing some of that tightness in the front of our hip into our hip flexor area. So our hip flexors come from the front of our spine, and they actually come down into the front of our hip and attach to the top of our front of our thigh. So if that muscle shortens, that makes me go into a march position. And when I'm sitting for prolonged periods, this is getting short over time. I go to stand up and I can't quite stretch them out all the way. So what we want to do is use our lacrosse ball or tennis ball, whatever you have, and we're going to place it there and do a mobilization. So that muscle, when we're trying to line up with it, we want to get from between our belly button and the lower angle of our ribs. And we're just going to place that ball right into that spot there, and then I'm going to lay on top of it. Now, as I lay on top of it, as we always do with the mobilization with the ball, is I can move around, find the spot where it feels tender to me, and then my mobilization is going to be maybe bending and straightening my knee. I might find that keeping my knee bent and rotating that leg in and out might be a good mobilization for me. Or if you can tolerate, maybe you're just slightly pressing your trunk up, right? And then I'm going to relocate, find a new spot, and again do that mobilization again. I want to work with this ball from the lower angle of my rib cage all the way into the part just inside the bony part of my hip. Our hip flexors come all the way down and they actually cross the hip. So just inside that pointy bony part in the front of our hip we can work on. The other part that happens on the outside of the hip as we rotate out is that band that goes on the lateral part of our thigh can get really tight and tense and create pain. So that band is pretty firm and dense, and we're not going to get a lot of mobility just trying to work on that, but there's a little part of that band that is a muscular component, so we can work on that. So that part is from that bony part of our hip and then slightly below that. So again, I'm going to take the ball, I'm going to place it right there, just below the bony part of my hip, and lay on top of it. And I might need to actually roll a little bit toward my side to get to the right spot there, but again, my mobilization can be bending and straightening the knee, or maybe rolling that leg in and out. So that band, because it's pretty firm and dense, we're not going to get a lot of mobilization there, but we can work on the interface of that band to the muscles. So along that front edge of the band, it attaches to the quad, or it can attach. It shouldn't be attached. It should be free and moving, but when it gets adhered down, then it becomes discomforting. So we're just going to take that ball, again laying on our bellies, and we're going to put that ball underneath our thigh and come towards the outside border there. And I want to find up and down there and move that knee up and down. And again, maybe rotation might work better for me on that. Now this can be a pretty intense sensation for this, so be gentle when you start these, but you're going to definitely find some spots along that anterior aspect of that band. All right, so that's how we can work along where that iliotibial band attaches to your quad. The other part is the posterior part of that band, and that attaches to the hamstring, or it can attach, it shouldn't be, right? It should be able to move freely. So for that, we'll just be sitting up, and we can put that ball underneath the posterior part of that band, so slightly towards the outside of the leg, and my mobilization for that can be bending and straightening that ankle back and forth, and I can move around up and down with that. This is a little bit harder to get to just because it's hard to get that body weight, so you could maybe possibly lean on it a little bit. You might possibly want to put a sandbag or a weighted vest, or if you use a heavy dumbbell or a kettlebell to kind of put some pressure on there so you can mobilize that a little bit. Now that band, it comes from the crest of our pelvis and it runs down the outside of our leg, and it does cross the knee joint. Right, so we want to make sure that we don't just work this top part here where it's probably uncomfortable, but we want to work down along that whole band, even up into that knee joint space. So as we've gotten that moving better, if you don't have a lacrosse ball, you can use a tennis ball. This is a kind of a soft, medium-sized ball. This works really well for that laying on your belly, doing those hip flexor ones. So you can be creative with this. If you don't have an exact lacrosse ball, you can try to use other things, baseballs, softballs. If you understand the concept, you can always apply it. So the best stretch to get those hips to extend is in a half kneeling position. And in this half kneeling position, most people feel like what they want to do is they want to lunge forward with it. I don't think that's a great stretch for that, because we can do it more effectively. If we keep ourselves upright and we just squeeze that butt muscle on and push that hip forward, I feel that stretch right into that top third of my quad, top third of my thigh. That's my hip flexor, right? And that muscle attaches to my back, so it's also going to affect the way my back feels. Now, what's good about this is we can wind this system up a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to move my foot out to the side, which is going to internally rotate my hip. And now I can do that same exact stretch, squeezing that butt muscle, pushing forward, and that feels a little bit more of an intense stretch for me, including down the outside of my thigh. If you remember, when we're sitting for prolonged periods of time and our hips are flexed, and then as we get tired, they start to externally rotate, right? So I'm stuck in this flexed, externally rotated position, where right now I have my hip in an extended and internally rotated position, right? So I'm stretching the exact opposite position of where I've been getting stuck at. If you wanted to make this a little more advanced and you have availability to use an exercise band, you can do that same exact position, and I just have the band set to about knee height, so that way when I get into this position, it's parallel to the ground, and I have it right underneath the fold of my butt. Same idea, I can wind that system up, squeeze that butt muscle, push forward, and the band is kind of pulling my thigh bone forward and giving me a little more stretch into that front of that hip socket. Right, so that's a great way you can do that one. The last stretch that I like to do, right, and we can work back and forth through these. The last one I like to do for that lateral band is if we lay down on our backs with our knees bent, and we just lift our hips up, and then we're going to scoot our butt towards the side that I want to stretch. So I'm scooting toward my right, and then I put my foot down and cross my ankle over on top. As long as I keep that hip flat, I feel the stretch along the outside of my thigh. Now if I need to take it up a little more, I can scoot my shoulders over or scoot my feet over, but what I want to make sure is that that hip stays flat. If I start to roll up, I'm not really getting the stretch I want. I want to stay nice and flat. You should feel it on the outside of the hip, possibly down the outside of the thigh. You want to be able to hold that position for 2 minutes. Same thing with the half kneeling ones. At first when we're doing those and we're contracting that butt muscle, it's turning off the front of the hip, which is giving a nice stretch. And we want to work on holding those for 30 seconds, but over time we want to start to work on those for 2 minutes. When we're doing the band one, we kind of work in and out of it, but eventually we want to get to that spot where we feel that stretch and we want to hold it for 2 minutes or longer. Try that out, see if that helps with the tightness in the front of the hips, the side of the hips, and if you're having any pain down the outside of the thighs. Also be aware of your sitting positions, because as we're sitting longer, we're getting stuck in that flexion position, that externally rotated position, and if we get up and move and stretch a little bit, we should resolve some of those symptoms. Let me know how that goes.